Welcome back to the Mech Deck Tech. Today we have our third Precon upgrade guide for Modern Horizons 3 featuring Graveyard Overdrive. This is a Lurgoyf Kindred deck that's looking to mill a bunch of Lurgoyfs to cheat them out onto the field thanks to our commander, Disa the Restless. So Disa the Restless is a 5/6 for 5. Whenever a Lurgoyf permanent is put into our graveyard from anywhere aside from the battlefield, we get to cheat them back onto the battlefield. Already pretty strong. In addition to this, Disa has whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we're going to create a Termagoyf token. So Termagoyf is going to get, more power based on the number of different types of cards in graves. With the recent addition of battles, they are stronger than ever. And, we're really looking to just sort of abuse the fact that, we're going to get these out early-ish. We're going to have a bunch of cards that are going to let us cheat specific cards into our grave. It'll be a good time. As always, though, we are going to go over 10 cards that we think should be taken out, as well as 10 cards we feel are going to make the deck a little bit more either synergistic or just more consistent for your plays. Starting off this list of cuts is Bituminous Blast. Bituminous Blast is a 5-cost instant. It deals 4 damage to a creature, and it cascades. The cascade effect is nice, but honestly, I could do without it. I feel like the 4 damage for targeted removal is nice, but it's also not strong enough to get rid of some of the bigger commanders you're going to be coming across, especially with the kind of power that Modern Horizons 3 kind of brings to the table with these legendary creatures. And so I feel pretty confident that we could cut it with no issues. Following up that blast, we actually have 2 different Bloodbraid creatures. First is the Bloodbraid Challenger, a 4/3 with Cascade. The Cascade sub-theme, I guess, of the deck feels weird. We're really looking to dump a bunch of things into our grave, and while we could get some extra value out of these Cascades, I feel like we're going to get better value elsewhere. We're also getting rid of Bloodbraid Elf, which is a slightly cheaper, hastier 3/2, which also has Cascade. Again, it's just not necessary. I feel like dumping things into our graveyard, either through mill or through targeted, just library dumping or even just discarding, is going to pay off much stronger than these Cascade effects ever could. Burnished Heart follows up those Bloodbraid Elves, and honestly, again, it's a universally okay card for any commander deck. It's a good way to ramp, but I don't feel like we need it. Chandra's Ignition is going to follow that up. It is a 5-cost sorcery. Target creature we control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature, and each opponent. So definitely not bad. We could have some creature that's quite large, but it is also going to wipe our entire field aside from that single creature. Potentially game-ending if the creature's large enough. But with the game plan I have in mind for this deck, I don't feel we need this. It's sort of a win more situation, and although there's nothing wrong with winning more, I don't feel, it's in our best interest here. Exterminator Magmarch follows that up. This is an interesting Phyrexian construct. It's 4 mana for a 5/3. You can regenerate it, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets only a single non-land permanent that an opponent controls, if another opponent controls 1 or more non-land permanents that spell could target, it copies to it. Super interesting. Kind of wish it was a legendary creature, honestly, and really just so I could build around it. But super interesting concept. You're going to be copying spells. That being said, this deck, again, really doesn't feel like we're casting an overabundance of instant or sorceries that are going to target our opponent's things. So I feel like it's just a little underwhelming in this deck. Up next is Find Finality. So this is one of those like weird dual-faced sorceries. It does not have fuse, so you do have to choose which mode or like which card you want to play. But Find lets you return up to 2 creatures from your grave to hand. We're not going to have a ton of creatures in our grave if things are going to plan. Not a bad effect, but there are better ways of doing that. And then Finality is kind of expensive at 6. We do get to put 2+1/+1 counters onto a single creature, and then give -4/-4 to the entire board. So kind of a weird board wipe where, again, we're going to be left with like maybe 1 creature. Which, cool, you know, I'm not against the idea of, you know, wiping boards, you know, should the need arise. But I also don't feel like it's necessary for us. I feel like it's a little overcosted. So we're gonna go ahead and cut that bad boy. Following them up is another expensive card. This is Garruk, Apex Predator, a 7-cost Planeswalker for 5 mana. So we could destroy target Planeswalker. Not likely to see that in most of your Commander games, so kind of irrelevant. We could create a 3/3 Beast Creature token with Death Touch. Kind of nice, like a decent like kind of blocker for the most part. Once you have enough of them, you could definitely make them more aggressive. Right? You could full swing, any, you know, blocks they're doing are kind of like to your advantage. You could -3 them to destroy a creature and gain life equal to its toughness. Kind of cool. We're not really playing with life as a resource in this stack. And then finally they have an ultimate which is going to give an opponent an emblem. With whenever a creature attacks them, it gains +5/+5 trample. Super strong, but best case scenario, it takes like 4 turns to get there, right? The 3 to get up to 8. And then on turn 4 of it having been out, you minus it. That's assuming it's not taking damage from any other sources. I feel like it's a little unlikely. And it's really just not doing what we want, which is generating more Lurgoyfs. Gluttonous Hellkite is interesting, but I don't feel works in this deck. This deck wants us to have a bunch of creatures, so we could hit each opponent every turn to generate extra Kermorgoyf tokens. What is the Gluttonous Hellkite doing? Well, first and foremost, it's being expensive, right? So it's double X plus black, red, green. It is a Flamply boy, right? So it has flying trample, its base stats are 5/5. Whenever you cast it, each player has to sacrifice X creatures, and it's going to enter the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters for each creature sacrificed this way. And don't get me wrong, Gluttonous Hellkite could be a very big, very stompy boy. But it's forcing us to sacrifice creatures. And yeah, it's forcing our opponents to do the same. But again, that's not really what we're here to do. It feels like, hey, here's another thing that, like, these colors do. And I'm like, that's cool. That's not what I want to do, though. So we're going to go ahead and cut it. And last of the 10 cards that are being cut is the Maelstrom Pulse. So Maelstrom Pulse is a 3-cost sorcery. We would destroy a target non-land permanent and all other permanents of the same name. So this works against token strats, I guess. Otherwise, it's 3 mana, destroy a thing. And it kind of just feels underwhelming. I mean, if we were keeping the Exterminator Magmark, you know, cool for 3 mana, we're actually destroying 3 things. So a little wombo combo there, I guess, but I feel like, you know, we could do better elsewhere. With those 10 cards out of the way, obviously we need to add in 10 cards, so what are we adding? Well, we're going to start off with a little enchantment known as Conspiracy. So Conspiracy is a 5-cost enchantment. As it comes into play, you're going to choose a creature type, always Lurgoyf. Creatures you control and creatures in your grave, hand, and library are all of that chosen type. So now, all of your creatures are Lurgoyfs. Having any of them hit the bin from your hand or library or even from exile is going to trigger the commander and cheat them back out onto the field. Moving up into our instance, right past those artifacts, we didn't mess with those at all. We have Entomb. So Entomb is a nice little instant for a single black. We get to search our library for any card, throw it into the grave, and shuffle. So your primary target, assuming you don't already have it in like hand or already on the field or something, is going to be your Pyrogoyf. Pyrogoyf is honestly kind of like the bread and butter of this deck and what we're looking to do with it, which is to spam Lurgoyfs onto the field and have Pyrogoyf go off and just deal damage. We're going to burn our opponents to the ground with pure Lurgoyf value. Moving up into our sorceries, we have Reanimate. So, obviously early on, we're not guaranteed to have, all these Lurgoyf triggers going off, but we're, still trying to kind of get things into our grave. And there's always a chance that someone blows up our important Pyrogoyf. We don't like that. We're going to reanimate them. There's a number of effects you could go with to achieve this. For the main deck, we're going to go with Reanimate. I think I mentioned a few others in our honorable mentions, which we'll get to in just a moment. Following up Reanimate, this is an interesting one. It actually combos off with one of our honorable mentions, which we'll get to again in a moment. I'm going to keep mentioning them though, haha. But it's Gaia's Blessing. So Gaia's Blessing is 2 mana, sorcery. Target player will shuffle up to 3 target cards from their grave into the library, and also draw a card. The effect that we're kind of here for is when Gaia's Blessing is put into your graveyard from your library, you shuffle your whole grave right back into your library. This is going to really let you kind of reuse and abuse the fact that we're going to be able to kind of mill things out and really gain some value here. Buried Alive follows that up. So Buried Alive is a 3-cost sorcery, kind of very similar to Entomb. Obviously it's sorcery speed, so a little slower, but it does let us grab not just 1, but 3 creatures and just dump them in the bin. Each of which is going to trigger Disa, and bam, they'll be brought back onto our field. And if we have that Pyrogoyf, that's 3 triggers, it's a lot of damage. In a similar vein, we are going to be running some Breach the Multiverse. So Breach the Multiverse is 7 mana, so it is a little expensive, admittedly. But each of us players at the table, we're all going to mill 10. Already going well for us. We're probably going to hit a Lurgoyf for 2 in this process and get them back regardless. But for each player, we do get to choose a creature or planeswalker milled that way and kind of cheat it back out onto the field for free. So just a ton of value. And if we have Conspiracy or Masquerade Nexus, which already comes with the deck, on the field, ooh, that Pyrogoyf is going to be dealing so much damage. Terravore is going to be the first of our creature additions. So Terravore is another Lurgoyf, just to like kind of bump up those Lurgoyf numbers. They are a Trampley Boy, and their power and toughness is equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. So just a potentially powerful Lurgoyf, especially depending on, what kind of decks you're fighting. Any Lurgoyf would really do. He's just really an example of one, and a pretty good one at that. Not as good, of course, as Tarmogoyf. The fact that we create Tarmogoyf tokens, but we didn't have a Tarmogoyf in this deck from the start, Wizards, what are we doing? Come on, you could have had it in there. So for 2 mana, they are a star, 1+ star, where their power is going to be equal to the number of card types in all graveyards, and their toughness is that +1. We have a new Goyf. At least I'm pretty sure they're new, but it's another Goyf. So, single black mana. They are same power and toughness in terms of the Tarmogoyf, except that they also have escape. So they can escape for 3, including a black, and you have to exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. So yeah, you are potentially kind of thinning your own grave a little bit, but hopefully your opponents have, you know, all these card types in their grave. I feel like he's a pretty solid addition. And last up, we have Grist Voracious Larva. So, Grist is one of the new one-cost flip planeswalkers. They are a 1/2 with Death Touch, and whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from the grave or you cast it from your grave, you can pay a single green and flip him into Grist the Plague Swarm. So, Grist the Plague Swarm lets you create a little insect token, then mill 2 cards, and you get to put a Death Touch counter on the token if a black card was milled this way. You can also destroy enchantments and artifacts with them, and if you manage to actually get them up high enough, for each creature card in your graveyard, you're going to create a token copy of them, which is super strong. Alright, with those additions out of the way, let's go over some honorable mentions, things that you could, add in addition to those 10 cards. Or maybe you just want to slot them in lieu of one of those 10 cards because you feel they're a little more powerful. Starting off this list, we have Chainer Nightmare Adapt. So they are a 3/2 for 4. You could discard a card and then cast a creature spell from your grave. You can only do this once each turn. And whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste for the turn. So, Chainer really does 2 things for us. One, it lets us use our graveyard as a secondary hand, at least for our creatures, which is already pretty good. And 2, they are a repeatable way of discarding cards, right? Both of which are strong for us. If we discard any Lurgoyf and our commanders in the field, we're going to get to cheat them back. And obviously having a secondary hand in the form of a graveyard is strong for us. Golgari Grave Troll. They enter with +1/+1 counters for each creature in our grave. We can remove those +1/+1 counters to regenerate it. And it has Dredge 6, which is going to let us kind of fill up our grave. Hermit Druid. So Hermit Druid is actually the boy that goes off with that Gaia's Blessing. To do so consistently, you want to make sure you don't have any basic lands. This will mill your entire deck all at once, cheating out all of your Lurgoyfs. And if you have either the Masquerade Nexus or Conspiracy on the field, right, you really get to cheat back all of your creatures. And then the Gaia's Blessing will be like, oh hey, you're done milling? That's cool. You milled me from your library. Go ahead and shuffle this graveyard back in. And I'm like, don't mind if I do. Auric Loremage, super strong. So for 4 mana, you get a 3/3 who you could tap to look for any card in your library and throw it into your grave. If it were an instant or sorcery, Auric gets bigger. That's not why we're using him. We're using him just to, fill up our grave. Realmwalker is a changeling, so they are going to trigger all of our Lurgoyf style effects. When they enter, you're going to want to choose Lurgoyf, and then we can just cast some Lurgoyfs off the top, which is pretty solid. Shieldred Whispering One is begging to be in this deck. It is a graveyard reanimation deck. We're going to force our opponents to sack. We're going to recur every single turn. So, very solid. Didn't quite fit the main theme, which was, mill a bunch of Lurgoyfs, but definitely solid. And last of the honorable creatures is the Vile Entomber, which is just entomb on a creature. Moving down into our honorable sorcery mentions, we have Dread Return. Really just a nice way to cheat back a creature from the grave. We could also flash it back. Lively Dirge, which is one of the spree cards from Outlaws of Thunder Junction, an interesting mechanic to be sure. But it's going to let us dump a card from our grave into the bin, and if we wanted to do the extra step, we could return up to 2 creatures from our grave with total mana value 4 or less to the battlefield. We do have some pretty cheap Lurgoyfs Obviously, milling them with the first effect, assuming our commander's on the field. We don't need to use the second effect to get them. But there are other creatures that are cheap-ish that we could get back. Last up is Victimize, which is more reanimation. We do have to sacrifice a creature to reanimate 2 creatures, but that feels like good value to me. Moving down into some honorable artifacts, we have Ashes of the Fallen. And this is another choose a creature type style effect. Each creature in our grave is the chosen type. So, whenever the creatures we're milling hit the grave, they are going to be Lurgoyfs. Commander's going to see it, cheat them back. Blade of Selves is actually super strong in this. So for those of you who haven't seen it before, it is a 2-cost equipment. It does cost 4 to equip, so a little expensive, admittedly. But it gives the equipped creature Myriad. And again, with Pyroglyph on the field, you almost really want to equip that Pyroglyph if you have a safe attack for it, or make it unblockable or something, indestructible, whatever you need to do. You swing with it, he generates an extra 2 copies in a standard game because it's 1 for each opponent that he's not already attacking. Each of the Pyroglyphs are going to see the other Pyroglyphs entering the battlefield, and they'll all trigger. It's a ton of damage. It can be very spicy. Mesmeric Orb is really just some mill. So every one of your lands, each of your creatures that are untapping is going to mill, your deck. This kind of fits what we're going for, right? We're trying to self-mill, get a bunch of value out of our deck that way. Some others that I don't have listed in here, but are potentially good additions, not as strong as they are in other decks, but I feel like they're worth mentioning. And that's both Scroll Rack and Sensei's Divining Top, just to manipulate the top of your deck if you're doing some self-mill type effects. Last up, we have some enchantments. So Animate Dead, this is just more graveyard recursion. Cemetery Tampering, which is going to give us a little hideaway, a little bit less important, but more importantly, we are going to mill 3 cards at upkeep. This is a May effect, we don't have to do it, but once there are 20 or more cards in grave, we get to play the hideaway card for free. Insidious Roots gives all of our creature tokens the ability to tap for mana, which we are generating some, so could be handy. And whenever 1 or more creature cards leave our graveyard, we are going to create a 0 green plant creature token and put a +1/+1 counter on each plant we control. So, we are kind of building a board state with this. I think it's interesting. The mana part is maybe useful. I don't feel like we have a ton of things that are like super high cost, right? We're cheating mana a lot here, which is why it's not in the main deck, but I do feel it's pretty strong. Out of the Tombs. So Out of the Tombs is going to get 2 Eon counters on it at upkeep, and then we're going to mill equal to the number of Eon counters on it. If we would draw a card while we have no cards in our library, instead we're going to return a creature card from grave to battlefield, and if we can't, we lose the game. So again, this is more recursion. We do need to be able to keep a creature in our grave at all times, at least 1, just to avoid losing to it. But it's interesting, and it's escalating ramp. And last but not least, we have Ripples of Undead. So this is a 2-cost enchantment, which is going to have us mill 3 cards. Then we could pay a single mana and 3 life to return a card from among those back to our hand. So it is extra card draw in addition to mill. I think it's interesting and works here pretty well. But those are the honorable mentions. That is the upgrade guide. If you guys enjoyed this deck tech, this upgrade guide, please like, comment, subscribe, do all the algorithm things. If you want to discuss Magic, anime, tabletops, nerdy things in general, join the Discord. There is a link in the description. Until next time, good luck with your builds. But, more importantly, the effect that we're kind of here for is Gaia's Blessing.